One of the things that I have to separate in my mind often is what the market bears and what's going on in the market, and then what is actually going on sort of closer to home. And those are two different entities. I often think about and people don't really understand. It's kind of a hard thing to grasp. Um, but there's a difference between what the market demands and then what is actually going on in terms of the expectation of doing something locally. Maybe it's at your own organization. Education, for example, might be like what is allowed in terms of graduating, and then what the market actually is asking for. And those are two different constructs. And they're often very challenging to reconcile, right? Because the market often, and it really depends, a market is not necessarily this big amorphous thing, but the market often demands things that are of a much higher standard than, what that you can do locally, or the experiences that you have. And it's often very difficult to reconcile these two particular things, where you are thinking about, I want to be able to do this, but you want to be able to be at the market, the leading edge of the market, but you just can't, right? Because you it's not possible at, given the resources that you actually have locally, or the challenges that you face locally. And, what can you do to reconcile this? Often it's just, for me, it's being okay with who I am, um, doing the best that I possibly can. I know that these are really wishy-washy things, but that's ultimately what it is, right? Like, you cannot there and there's a difference between the market. So that's where I want to come back to this idea of where I was saying, like, the market is not this big amorphous thing. It's not supply and demand as you think about, but there is there's sort of layers of robustness, I guess one would think about, of that the very elite in the market will demand much higher than sort of lower levels. There is a bit of a status ranking that happens in all markets that we know of. This is a very real thing. However you might define status, there's a technical definition, but you probably understand it. Um, and there is um, a lot that goes on in terms of how the market chooses different things, right? It's not necessarily like a supply and demand thing that you think about, or what economists like to talk about. There's a lot that goes on in terms of selection and retention, and how people procure resources. A lot of things that go on, lots of decision points that are going on. But to reconcile these two things, right? You can't sort of fix the market. That's not at what's called your level of analysis. You can't really have a lot of sway unless you do a lot of institutional work and building things at the institutional level, so the market will work much more effectively. That takes a lot of work, and that's probably somebody's full-time job. But at your level, that you can do for any individual is just to have a long-term perspective, and to give yourself a lot of grace, a lot of forgiveness, making sure that you're constantly reconciling with yourself so that you feel better every day, and feeling support inside yourself and from other people. And you do that every single day, um, repeatedly, until you're able to reconcile the differences between the two. Because the market, quote unquote market, is a long run thing. Um, and it may never be reconciled, right? And so you need to come to terms with that. And then how do you come to terms with that? There's a lot of self-forgiveness, a lot of grace, a lot of just working internally, all the psychology stuff, counseling stuff, all that stuff super matters to reconcile the differences between the two that may always be inconsistent, but that's okay. That's a part of life. And we have to learn how to live within the systems we live in. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.